right, so the udhiyah, we want to call it sacrifice. The sacrifice is an emphasized recommendation. A lamb that has lost its front teeth or has completed 1 year is sufficient. This or that. If it's not 1 year old, then you can't sacrifice that one unless its teeth already fell out. Also, what's sufficient? A 2-year-old goat, or a 5-year-old camel, or a 2-year-old cow. A camel is sufficient on behalf of 7 people. The cow also for 7. And the sheep for 1 and the goat for 1. And sheep and goats are the same category. 4 types are not sufficient for sacrifice. The one-eyed animal whose blindness in the eye is obvious. The lame animal, like limping, whose lameness is obvious. The sick animal whose sickness is obvious. And the emaciated animal whose emaciation, thinness is obvious. The castrated animal is sufficient. And if it has a broken horn, that's sufficient too. If its ear or tail is cut off, that's not sufficient. The time of the sacrifice is from the time of Eid prayer until the sunset of the last of the days of Tashriq. 5 things are recommended during the slaughter, not obligatory. To say Bismillah, that's Shafi'i school. According to other than Ash-Shafi'i, saying Bismillah is obligatory. Other Imams, they said, if you leave out the Basmala on purpose, your slaughter is invalid. Shafi'i says, no, even if you leave it out on purpose, it's still valid as long as the actual slaughter is done right. The Basmala itself is not a condition for the slaughter. Shafi'i has several arguments for that. And among his arguments is that it's not a condition for a Christian or a Jew to say the Basmala when they slaughter. And it's permissible for us to eat their meat. So more so, Shafi'i says more so for a Muslim then. If the kafir doesn't have to say the basmala and we can eat his meat, then the Muslim doesn't have to say the basmala. We can still eat his meat. But if you heard somebody saying it's obligatory, you don't have to argue with them or anything. To say salah on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam while slaughtering, that's sunnah. To face the qibla, that's sunnah, not obligatory. The scholar said the only thing that requires qibla is prayer. Requires qibla. Prayer requires qibla. So qibla for other than that, that's sunnah. With a detail about the one who wants to relieve himself in the open land. There's a detail there. And to say the takbir and to make dua for acceptance. To say the takbir and to make dua for acceptance. Now, when a person sacrifices an animal, he might have made a vow to do that or not. The vow means he's basically making it obligatory on himself. What that means is, it's called nadhr. Nadhr is when you take something that's not obligatory originally, but it is rewardable. It has to be rewardable. It's not originally obligatory, and then because you make a nadhr to do it, you have to do it. It becomes obligatory on you. That's different also from a swear. Yani, I'm not talking about saying wallahi, not that. Saying, Wallahi, I will, or Wallahi, I won't, that's not nether. Nether means a person says, Lillahi alayya katha, which means, for the sake of Allah, I shall do such and such. And he means, I now make it obligatory on myself. I now make a vow to do such and such thing. Now it becomes obligatory on him and he can't get out of it. When it comes to another, you cannot get out of another. All you can do is do it. That's it. Its pro is that it increases your reward because the reward of an obligation is higher than the reward of an optional deed. So what was originally not obligatory on you, by making it obligatory, you make it more rewardable for yourself. Though what you were allowed to not do, now if you don't do it, you're going to be sinful. Some people, and there's no way to get out of it. You cannot reverse it. So what if somebody made another to sacrifice? So whoever makes a sacrifice, he made another to sacrifice, then it's haram for him to eat the meat. He can't eat that meat. The vower, the one who makes the vow, cannot eat that meat. He distributes it. But if he did the sacrifice voluntarily with no vow involved, then he can eat from the meat. And also, the sacrificer cannot sell any of the meat, and he should feed the poor. Feed the poor and his family. He should feed his family with that, and feed the poor with that, and feed the Muslims with that. So let me see some details that might be here. So the udhiyah is the name of what's slaughtered on Eid and the 3 days of Tashriq as a worship, what's sacrificed. And that's a sunnah mu'akkada, that sacrifice. And this is a sunnah mu'akkada that's like a communal sunnah mu'akkada. Meaning it's not sunnah mu'akkada necessarily for every single one. Like if you have a household, it's enough if somebody in the house does it, that covers his house, for example. And this sacrifice is not obligatory unless one vows to do it. That's what would make it obligatory. So what's sufficient is al-jadha. Jadha, it means it's a year old. A year old means it started going towards its second year. Year-old sheep or 2-year-old goat, meaning it's now headed towards its third year. Or a 5-year-old camel, so it's going towards its sixth year. Or a 2-year-old cow. And like we said, a camel covers 7 people, a cow covers 7 people, and a sheep or goat covers 1 person. For one person to sacrifice a sheep or goat is better than for him to share in the cow or the camel. The best sacrifice is a camel, then a cow, then sheep or goat. And 4 types are not sufficient, are insufficient sacrifices. The one with an obvious, that's obviously one-eyed. One that's obviously one-eyed, even if it still has, there's an eyeball there, even if the eyeball is still in there. 2 is one that has an obvious limp. The third one is one that is clearly sick. Not lightly sick, clearly sick. And even the other one, like if its eye is a little bit messed up, just then that's still good enough. Or it has very little limp, then it's still good enough. And then the fourth one is the emaciated one. He says here, its bone marrow is gone. And what is sufficient is the castrated one and the one with a broken horn, as long as that doesn't have any effect on its meat. And also sufficient is one that misses horns altogether. And insufficient is one that has cut ear, even if it's part of the ear is missing. Even if it was created without ears, it's not sufficient. And same thing for the tail. If its tail was cut off or part of its tail. The time of sacrifice starts at the time of the Eid prayer. Imam an-Nawawi said in one of his books, so this is his expression, the time of sacrifice is when the sun rises on the day of sacrifice, which is Eid, and there has passed the amount of 2 rak'ahs and 2 light speeches. There has passed the time of 2 rak'ahs and 2 light speeches. Basically, it's like duha time, like we said. It's approximately, it's close. And the time of slaughter remains until the sunset on the last of the days of Tashriq. And 5 things are recommended for this sacrifice. One is saying Bismillah. And the best is saying Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. And if he doesn't say anything, it's still valid. The second is making salah on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The third is facing the Qibla, meaning that he turns his sacrifice towards the Qibla in the sacrifice place. In the place of sacrifice, he turns his sacrifice towards the Qibla and he faces the Qibla himself also. The fourth is saying the takbir before saying Bismillah or afterwards 3 times. And the fifth is making dua for acceptance. So the sacrificer says, Allahumma hadihi mink. Hadihi minka wa ilayk. Oh Allah, this is from you and dedicated to you. Fataqabbal. So accept. So it means this sacrifice is an endowment from you and it is a worship done for gaining your acceptance. So accept from me. And the sacrificer does not eat any vowed sacrifice. Rather, it is obligatory on him to give all of it in charity, to give all of its meat in charity. So he can't even waste it if he vowed. He can't let it go bad. He has to give it in charity. But if he is voluntarily sacrificing without a vow, then he may eat from it. A third. You can take a third of it. And as for the other 2/3, it is said that he gives them in charity. That's what An-Nawawi said. And it was said that he can gift 1/3 to rich Muslims and 1/3 to poor Muslims. That's another saying. And he does not sell any of it, any of the sacrifice. Not the meat or the hair or the skin. And he can't make any of the sacrifice a salary for who slaughters for him. The butcher, Yani. He cannot make any of the sacrifice a salary for the butcher. And also, one feeds the poor. For sure, he feeds the poor. And the best is for him to give in charity all of it, except for some morsels, so that he would eat them for the blessing. It is sunnah for him to eat some morsels of that for the blessings and then to give the rest of it in charity. And if one eats some and gives the rest in charity, then he gets the reward of the sacrifice. The actual act of sacrificing, he gets that reward. And he gets the reward of whatever portion he gave in charity. So 2 different rewards there. He sacrificed, so he gets his reward for the sacrifice. He kept some of it and he gave in charity some of it, so he gets a reward for whatever portion he gave away in charity.